Imagine being trapped in a metal box, smaller than a phone booth, suspended nearly 5 miles above the earth. The temperature outside is 60 degrees below zero. The roar of 4 engines is a constant, bone-rattling thunder. This is your world. And through a small pane of glass you watch the enemy approach. This is the story of a man who occupied the most dangerous seat in the sky, and what happens when he decided the best defense was to attack. By the time you reach the end of this journey, you will understand how one man's refusal to die rewrote the rules of war. This tiny isolated space at the very back of a B-17 flying fortress was known by many names: the tail stinger, the rear turret. But the men who occupied it had a colder, more honest name for it. They called it the coffin corner, and for good reason. In the brutal air war over Europe, the tail gunner had the highest casualty rate of any position on the bomber. German fighter pilots were trained to attack from the rear, from the bomber's blind spot at 6 o'clock high. The tail gunner was the only thing standing between them and the 9 other men in the aircraft. The statistics were a grim reality. Nearly 4 out of every 10 tail gunners would not finish their tour of duty. It was a position you took because you were assigned, not because you volunteered. Who would willingly choose to be the primary target? Was it courage, or was it something else that drove a man to seek out such a fate? For Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, the choice was simple. He grew up in South Boston, a world of cobblestone streets and cold harbor winds, where survival was a lesson learned with bruised knuckles and a bloody lip. His father worked the docks, a man whose hands were as tough as worn leather. His older brother was a Golden Gloves boxer who taught him that the fight is often won or lost before the first punch is even thrown. In Southie, you learned a fundamental truth. Waiting gets you hurt. Hesitation gets you put on the ground. Action, swift and decisive, is what keeps you breathing. By the time he was 17, Mike Donovan had been in more street fights than he could count, but he remembered his losses perfectly. He only lost when he started too late. So when the news of Pearl Harbor echoed through the streets of Boston, Donovan didn't wait. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces the next day. The recruiters saw his tough build and wanted to put him on a ground crew, turning wrenches and loading bombs. But Donovan saw the war differently. He didn't want to support the fight, he wanted to be the fight. He insisted on gunnery school. From the first day, he was a problem for his instructors. They taught discipline, patience, and conservation. Their doctrine was written in the language of defense. Wait for the enemy fighter to commit to its attack run. Wait until it enters the effective range of your guns. Fire in short, controlled bursts to conserve ammunition. Protect the aircraft. It was a doctrine of reaction. Donovan, however, was a man of action. His entire life had taught him that reacting was just a prettier word for losing. During training exercises, he fired early. He wasted ammunition on targets at extreme ranges. He tracked and simulated attacks on fighters that weren't even a direct threat. His instructors saw a reckless, insubordinate recruit who couldn't follow the rules. They told him he was too aggressive, too willing to expose himself to return fire. His response became a quiet legend that echoed through the barracks at gunnery school. "Dead gunners don't shoot back," he told his commanding officer. "Live ones do." He graduated 3rd in his class, not for his accuracy, but for his sheer, unbelievable speed. Michael Donovan could see a threat, acquire a target, and fire faster than anyone the instructors had ever seen. His secret was simple. He wasn't waiting to be attacked, he was hunting. But what happens when a hunter is placed in a position designed for prey? In March of 1944, Donovan was transferred to the 390th Bombardment Group, stationed in the muddy fields of Framlingham, England. He was assigned to a B-17 that already carried a dark reputation. Her name was Hell's Fury. The bomber had flown just 3 missions, but had 2 near-catastrophic encounters with German fighters. The crew was skilled, but the tail gunner position seemed to carry a curse. The previous gunner, a sergeant named Eddie Morrison, had survived a harrowing attack, but requested an immediate transfer upon landing. He told the crew chief, his hands still shaking, "That position's cursed. The next man who sits back there is going to die." Most men would have seen this as a warning. Donovan saw it as an opening. He volunteered for the position that very day. The pilot, Captain James Whitmore, was skeptical. He called Donovan into his office for a personal interview. "You know the statistics for that seat, Sergeant?" Whitmore asked, his eyes studying the young gunner. "It has the highest casualty rate. 38% don't finish their tour." Donovan's reply was calm, without a trace of bravado. "Then I've got 62% odds, sir. I'll take them." Whitmore leaned forward. "Why? Why this plane? Why this position?" "Because," Donovan said, his voice steady, "I don't wait for them to shoot me. I shoot first." The captain stared at him for a long moment, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He saw no fear, no youthful arrogance, only a cold, unwavering certainty. This man wasn't just willing to fight, he was eager for it. Whitmore leaned back and nodded slowly. "You're insane," he said, a small smile breaking through. "You'll fit right in." But even as he said it, a question lingered in the air, unasked. Was this young gunner's incredible confidence a sign of a born warrior, or was he just a fool, blind to the terrifying reality of what lay ahead? Donovan's new home was a cramped, cold world of steel and glass. To move, he had to kneel, his knees pressed against a metal plate, his hands gripping the twin .50 caliber machine guns. He was so far back in the plane that the vibrations from the engines felt like a distant hum, a different reality from the immediate, violent shudder of his own guns. To survive the 60 below zero temperatures, he wore a fleece-lined suit with electric heating coils woven into the fabric, but the system was notoriously unreliable. More often than not, the cold was a physical presence, a constant ache in his bones that reminded him just how thin the aluminum skin of the bomber really was. In this lonely space, he pinned a small worn photograph of his brother in his boxing stance, a quiet reminder of the family creed: hit first. His first mission with Hell's Fury was on March 2, 1944. The target was a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt, a city so critical to the German war machine that it was defended by some of the most experienced fighter pilots in the Luftwaffe. As the bomber stream crossed into enemy airspace, the mood on the intercom was tense. The crew knew the plane's unlucky history. They knew the grim statistics of the tail gunner's seat. They were watching Donovan, waiting to see if the new man was any different. They didn't have to wait long. The call came, sharp and clipped. "Fighters, 6 o'clock high." Every man tensed. Captain Whitmore's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. "All right, Donovan, let's see what you've got. Call your shots." But Donovan didn't reply. His world had shrunk to the small pane of glass in front of him. He could see them, specks of black against the brilliant blue, beginning to form up for their attack run. Standard Doctrine, the rule book written by men in offices thousands of miles away, said to wait. Let them get to within 1,000 yards. Let the lead fighter commit. Conserve your ammunition. Donovan's rulebook, written in the back alleys of South Boston, had only one rule. There are no rules. He squeezed the triggers. A stream of tracers reached out across the sky, a brilliant, desperate arc that fell hundreds of feet short of the nearest German fighter. On the intercom, there was a stunned silence. Then the waist gunner's confused voice. "What was that? They're out of range." Captain Whitmore's voice was sharper. "Donovan, what are you doing? Conserve your ammunition." But Donovan ignored them. He fired again. Another long, seemingly useless burst into empty air. The German pilots saw it, too. They saw the tracers arcing towards them from a distance they considered safe. It was unexpected, it was illogical, and it was deeply unsettling. An attack run depends on precision, timing, and coordination. A gunner firing wildly from 2,000 yards away introduced a chaotic, unpredictable element. The German formation, instead of tightening into a deadly spearhead, hesitated. The lead pilot, likely believing he had misjudged the range, broke off, slightly to reassess. That moment of hesitation was all Donovan needed. As a single Messerschmitt BF-109 adjusted its course, it presented a cleaner profile. Donovan fired a third, more deliberate burst. This time, the tracers found their mark. The fighter's engine coughed black smoke, and it peeled away from the formation, spiraling down toward the earth. The rest of the German fighters, their coordinated attack now in shambles, broke off the engagement to regroup. When they landed back at Framlingham, the crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named Frank Murphy, was waiting. He was a man who thought in terms of logistics, fuel, oil, and ammunition. He stalked back to the tail section and counted the empty ammunition boxes. He found Donovan on the hardstand, calmly cleaning his guns. "You fired 1,600 rounds," Murphy said, his voice a mix of disbelief and accusation. "The standard load is 2,000. You used 80% of your ammo on one mission." Donovan didn't look up from his work. "And we didn't get hit," he replied. "I'll take that trade every day." The math was undeniable, but the method was heresy. Still, a success was a success. 2 days later, on March 4th, they flew again. This time, Donovan didn't just repeat his tactic, he refined it. As a new wave of BF-109s began their approach from the rear, every gunner in the formation fixed their eyes on the lead fighter. That was the primary threat, the one who would fire first. But Donovan had spent the night studying German tactics, thinking not like a gunner, but like a predator. He understood that the lead pilot was on high alert, expecting resistance. The wingman, however, had a different job. His focus was on maintaining his position relative to his leader. He was flying a predictable pattern, his attention divided. He was the weak link. Donovan ignored the lead fighter completely. He trained his guns on the second plane in the formation and unleashed a concentrated stream of fire. The wingman's cockpit exploded in a flash of orange and black. The lead pilot, suddenly and violently alone, saw his partner disintegrate beside him. The psychological shock was devastating. He broke off his attack so hard his plane nearly stalled, fleeing from a fight that had barely begun. The entire German attack fell apart. And yet, Donovan wasn't satisfied. He had proven he could disrupt attacks. He could protect his crew. But he saw a larger, more fundamental flaw in the way Americans were fighting the air war. Every defensive doctrine they followed was based on the assumption that the enemy controlled the timing and tempo of the fight. The Germans dictated the terms of engagement, and the American gunners simply reacted to it. What if, he wondered, you could reverse that? What if you could attack the attackers before they were ready to fight? What if you could force them to react to you? The idea was more than just aggressive. It was a complete inversion of aerial warfare. But could a strategy built on what seemed like reckless ammunition spending ever be adopted? Or was Michael Donovan a lone genius whose success could never be replicated on a larger scale? The morning of March 6, 1944, dawned cold and gray over the English countryside. In the briefing hut, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and nervous tension. The target for the day was an aircraft factory in Augsburg, deep in the heart of Germany. The mission planners didn't mince words. They were expecting heavy resistance. 800 B-17s would form the bomber stream, a massive aerial armada. But intelligence predicted that nearly 2,500 German fighters would rise to meet them. It was going to be a brutal day. Losses were expected to be high. Before they headed for the flight line, Captain Whitmore gathered the crew of Hell's Fury under the wing of the bomber. His words were simple and direct. "This one's going to be rough. Stay sharp, stay alive." As the men began to disperse for their pre-flight checks, Donovan raised his hand. "Permission to try something different, sir." Whitmore turned, a frown creasing his brow. "Like what, Sergeant?" "Aggressive fire," Donovan said, his voice even. "I want to engage the fighters before they commit to their attack runs. Force them to defend before they can even start their attack." The pilot's frown deepened. "That burns ammunition, Donovan. You'll be dry before the real fight even begins." "Or I'll prevent the real fight from ever happening," Donovan countered. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "Sir, we've been playing defense for 2 years. How's that working out? 38% casualty rate for my position. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting to get shot at." The logic was insane, but it was also undeniable. The current strategy was a meat grinder. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They'd all seen what Donovan could do on the last 2 missions. It was unorthodox, it was reckless, but it had worked. Whitmore looked from Donovan to the faces of his men, then back again. He saw their fear, but he also saw a glimmer of hope. He made his decision. "You've got 1 mission to prove it. If we get shredded, you're off the gun for good. Deal?" "Deal," Donovan said without hesitation. They took off at 06:47 hours, the 4 massive engines of Hell's Fury clawing their way into the sky. They joined the sprawling formation over East Anglia, climbing slowly to their operational altitude of 23,000 feet. The routine was familiar, almost mechanical, crossing the English Channel, entering German airspace at 0824 hours. For nearly an hour the sky was empty, a serene and beautiful canvas of blue. Then, at 9:20, the call came that every man dreaded. "Fighters, 6 o'clock high, 12 bandits." Donovan swiveled his twin 50s, his eyes scanning the sky. There they were. 12 Messerschmitt BF-109s, 2,000 yards out, a pack of wolves beginning to circle. They were forming up for a coordinated attack, a classic pincer movement designed to overwhelm the bomber's rear defenses. The book said to wait. Wait until they closed to 1,000 yards. Identify the lead fighter. Engage. Donovan did neither. He opened fire immediately. At 2,000 yards, it was a shot that no gunnery instructor would ever approve. It was maximum range, a near-zero probability of a hit. The stream of tracers cut through the empty sky, most missing by what seemed like hundreds of feet. On the intercom, Captain Whitmore's voice was a sharp crackle of anger. "Donovan, cease fire. You're wasting ammunition." "Negative, sir," Donovan replied, his voice eerily calm. "Watch what happens next." Down below, the German pilots were stunned. Fire from that range was not just unexpected, it was tactically insane. But the visual of tracers reaching for them had an immediate, disruptive effect. The lead fighter, startled by the premature engagement, instinctively broke to the right. His wingmen, their own attack plan now in chaos, hesitated. The entire, carefully choreographed attack pattern disintegrated before it could even begin. The wolves had scattered. The German fighters regrouped, but the nature of the fight had fundamentally changed. They were no longer the confident predators. They approached cautiously now, probing the bomber's defenses instead of diving in for the kill. The initiative, the control of the battle's rhythm, had shifted from the attackers to the defender. Donovan tracked the new lead fighter, letting him close to 1,500 yards, then opened fire again. Not a sustained barrage, but short, controlled bursts. He wasn't aiming to destroy the plane. He was aiming to destroy the pilot's nerve. It worked. The formation broke again, but one fighter, a wingman on the left, held his course. He was aggressive, experienced. Donovan recognized the type instantly. A veteran pilot who wouldn't be scared off by warning shots. This one would have to be handled differently. He let the fighter close. 1,400 yards, 1,300, 1,200, the range where most gunners would be pouring on sustained fire. Donovan held his. The German pilot, emboldened by the lack of resistance, pushed his attack. 1,000 yards. Now the fighter filled Donovan's sights. Donovan fired, not a burst, not a warning. He unleashed a sustained, overwhelming barrage, 200 rounds in 3 seconds. The concentration of fire was a physical wall of lead and steel. The BF-109 pilot tried to brake, but it was too late. He flew directly into the stream of tracers. His engine exploded, and the aircraft disintegrated into 1,000 pieces that tumbled slowly toward the earth. "Good kill!" the radio operator shouted over the intercom. Donovan just splashed one. But Donovan wasn't celebrating. He was already tracking his next target. The fight had only just begun. Donovan wasn't celebrating because he knew the remaining 11 fighters were not retreating. They were learning. The veteran pilots among them had recognized his tactic. They had seen him isolate and destroy their wingman. They would not fall for the same trick twice. Now they were angry, and they were adapting. When they came again, it was not as a single, cohesive unit. They split into 2 groups, a classic pincer movement. 6 fighters approached from the direct rear at 6 o'clock. 5 more swung wide, beginning a diving attack from the 7 o'clock position. Their goal was simple: divide his attention. Force him to choose between 2 immediate threats. No single gunner could effectively engage both groups at once. This was the moment where standard defensive doctrine failed. A gunner trying to cover both sectors would be ineffective against either, firing short, panicked bursts that would do little more than announce his position. But Donovan wasn't a standard gunner. He understood his role not as a lone defender, but as part of a system. His voice came over the intercom, sharp and clear, not a hint of panic in it. "Waist gunners, you've got the 7 o'clock. I'm holding 6. He placed his trust in the 2 men amidships, Sergeants Tommy Price and Carl Johnson. He completely ignored the 5 fighters diving at his left, turning his entire focus to the 6 coming straight at him. The German pilots in the 6 o'clock group expected a split defense. They expected a nervous, distracted gunner. Instead, they flew directly into a storm of focused, methodical fire. Donovan picked the lead aircraft and fired. The fighter exploded. He immediately shifted to the new leader and fired again. Another hit, another explosion. In less than 30 seconds, 3 more Messerschmitts fell from the sky. The remaining fighters in his sector, stunned by the sheer ferocity of the defense, broke off their attack and fled. The threat at 7 o'clock, facing a determined barrage from the waist guns, also veered away. For a moment, the sky was clear again, but it was a fragile peace. 15 minutes later, the real attack began. The first wave had been a probe. What came next was a sledgehammer. 18 fighters, a full German staffel, appeared in the distance. They had learned from the mistakes of the first group. They did not attack in a simple, predictable line. They came from multiple vectors at once. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. It was a textbook, overwhelming assault, designed to saturate the bomber's defenses from every rear quarter. Donovan burned through his ammunition, his guns a constant roar. He was forced to play defense, reacting to the swarm of targets. He shot down 2 more, but the cost was enormous. The constant firing had consumed hundreds of rounds in mere minutes, and then the situation went from desperate to impossible. The German commanders, realizing a single bomber was putting up a furious fight, decided to end it. Radar picked up new contacts, 36 more fighters, a full group of BF-109s, and the heavily armed Focke-Wulf 190s. Combined with the aircraft already in the sky, Hell's Fury was now facing 48 enemy fighters. During the chaotic battle, the bomber had drifted from the main formation. The nearest friendly plane was 3 miles away. The P-51 Mustang escorts were engaged elsewhere. They were utterly, completely alone. Donovan took a precious second to check his ammunition. He had 380 rounds left, against 48 fighters. The math was a death sentence. In the cockpit, Captain Whitmore knew it too. His voice, for the first time, carried the grim weight of their reality. "Hold on, boys. We're in for it." But in his coffin corner, Donovan saw one last desperate chance. Not a chance to survive, but a chance to fight on his own terms. "Captain," his voice cut through the tension. "Permission to try something." "What is it, Donovan?" "Attack." A profound silence filled the intercom. The other 9 crewmen held their breath. The idea was so far beyond the realm of training, of reason, of sanity, that for a moment no one spoke. Then Whitmore's voice, carefully controlled, came back. "Explain." "Those fighters are forming up for a coordinated assault," Donovan said, speaking fast. "They're 2,000 yards out. Give them another minute and they'll hit us from every angle at the same time. We can't defend against that, but we can disrupt it. If I engage them now, while they're still organizing, I can break them up before they're ready." "You'll be out of ammunition in 30 seconds, Whitmore stated, the cold logic of it hanging in the air. "Then I better make every second count," Donovan shot back. "Sir, defensive tactics won't work when you're outnumbered 50-1. Our only chance is to hit them while they're vulnerable." Was it a stroke of tactical genius, or the last gamble of a man who refused to die on his knees? Whitmore had only seconds to decide. He trusted his training, his instruments, his crew. But in this moment he chose to trust the beautiful, terrible madness of his tail gunner. "Do it," he ordered. "If you get us killed, I'm writing your family a very angry letter." Donovan didn't waste a breath responding. The German formation was a vast swarm, still arranging itself into deadly, coordinated waves. He took aim not at a single aircraft, but at the empty space in the very center of the group, the invisible point around which their entire attack plan revolved. He squeezed the triggers and held them down. It was not a burst. It was a desperate, sustained roar of defiance. He poured 200 rounds into the heart of the formation in 8 seconds. The effect was not just physical, it was psychological. The tracers ripped through the formation's core. A BF-109, caught by stray rounds, burst into flames. 2 other pilots, panicking to evade the unexpected attack, collided in midair. The entire German armada, a carefully constructed weapon of 48 fighters, shattered into chaos. Attack plans were forgotten. Coordination evaporated. It was no longer a hunting pack. It was 45 terrified individuals, scattering in every direction, trying to figure out what had just happened. On the intercom, there was only the sound of breathing. One tail gunner had just broken the largest fighter assault any of them had ever seen, using a tactic no one had ever imagined. Donovan knew the chaos he had created was only a temporary shield. He had bought them time, perhaps only a minute or two, But the Germans would be back, and they would be furious. The scattered fighters regrouped with a terrifying speed. 90 seconds, that's all it took. This time, they didn't bother with careful formations or coordinated tactics. They swarmed. It was a raw, vengeful assault. 12 fighters broke from the main group and dove at Hell's Fury's tail simultaneously. There was no strategy, no precision, just an overwhelming application of violence. With only 180 rounds left, Donovan had to make every single bullet a final, definitive statement. He couldn't afford to shoot at the closest targets or the most aggressive. He had to think like a pack hunter. He knew that in any swarm there is a psychological center, the handful of confident, aggressive pilots who give the others their courage. Take them out, and the pack loses its nerve. He picked his targets with the cold precision of a surgeon. A 30-round burst into the first plane, another into the second, a third into the one flying at the very heart of the swarm. All 3 aircraft took hits. One exploded in a brilliant orange fireball. The other 2, trailing thick black smoke, broke away, their fight over. The remaining 9 fighters, their confidence shaken, continued their attack, closing to within 400 yards. Cannon fire from their wings lit up the sky, 20-millimeter rounds streaking past Donovan's turret. The bomber shuddered as several rounds found their mark, the sound of shrieking, tearing metal echoing through the fuselage. But Donovan kept firing. Target, burst, target, burst. He was a machine, devoid of fear, devoid of hesitation. Another BF-109 fell, then another. 5 fighters remained. They were now at point-blank range, less than 200 yards away. Donovan could see the faces of the pilots. Young men, their features tight with determination. He shot them anyway. 2 more fighters disintegrated under the focused fire of his guns. The last 3, seeing their comrades obliterated at such close range, finally broke off. The risk of colliding with the bomber, or with the debris of their fallen friends, now outweighed the reward of the kill. Donovan tracked one last fleeing fighter, his sights locked perfectly on the cockpit. He squeezed the trigger. Nothing. A dull, metallic click. The guns were dry. The roar of the 50 calibers was replaced by a sudden, terrifying silence. In 45 seconds he had fired 180 rounds and destroyed 6 more enemy aircraft. But now he was completely defenseless. "I'm out." His voice on the intercom was flat, a simple statement of fact. "Dry on all guns." "Copy," Whitmore responded, his own voice tight. "Damage report. Anyone hit?" The crew checked in, one by one. The ball turret had taken some damage. The rudder cables were showing stress. But everyone was alive. The bomber could still fly. She just couldn't fight back. And the Germans knew it. They had been counting. They had watched him expend his last rounds. They regrouped one final time. 27 aircraft remained from the original 48. They had lost an astonishing 21 fighters to this single, defiant bomber. The loss rate was catastrophic, a number that would have to be explained to their commanders. But they had one decisive advantage now. The tail position was neutralized. They came for him from directly astern at 6 o'clock low, the one angle his silent guns should have been helpless to defend. They approached in a tight, methodical formation. There was no more wild aggression. This was an execution. Slow, deliberate. They were taking their time, ensuring that this time there would be no mistakes. Donovan watched them come. 400 yards, 300, 200. He had no ammunition, no way to defend himself, but he still had one weapon left, his reputation. He gripped the handles of his guns. He traversed the turret, tracking the lead German fighter with perfect mechanical discipline. He kept the barrels of his twin 50s aligned perfectly with the pilot's cockpit, following his every move as if he had a full load of ammunition and was just waiting for the perfect moment to fire. In the cockpit of the lead Messerschmitt, the German pilot saw it. He saw the twin barrels of the tail gun tracking him, anticipating his flight path. He knew, logically, that the gunner must be out of ammunition. He had seen the final, desperate barrage. But instinct is older and more powerful than logic. For the last 4 minutes, those guns had been death incarnate. They had vaporized 21 of his comrades, and now they were pointed directly at his face. His training screamed at him to press the attack. His survival instinct screamed louder. The guns might be empty, but the man behind them had proven he was a devil. The German pilot broke. A hard, immediate right turn, an involuntary flinch from a threat that no longer existed. The rest of the formation, conditioned to follow their leader, followed him. The entire attack pattern, the final certain execution, fell apart. Not because Donovan could shoot them, but because they believed he could. The phantom threat, born from the psychological terror of his previous kills, was just as effective as a loaded gun. "They're breaking off," the bald turret gunner's voice cracked with utter disbelief. "They're actually breaking off," and they were. The German formation scattered, and this time they did not regroup. The cost had become too high. The psychological toll was too great. They had lost 21 planes, and their nerve to a single American bomber. They disengaged completely and flew for home, leaving Hell's Fury alone, battered but alive, in the vast hostile sky. Why did they commit to that final attack, only to be defeated by a bluff? Was it a calculated risk, or had the brutal losses of the day simply broken their will to fight? It is a question that would remain unanswered, lost in the silent retreat of a defeated foe. The rest of the mission was an exercise in quiet tension. The formation continued to Augsburg. They dropped their bombs, crippling the aircraft factory on the ground. They flew home through 3 more alerts of enemy fighters, but none of them engaged Hell's Fury. The story of the lone bomber with the demon in its tail had spread like wildfire through German radio communications. A warning was issued to Luftwaffe pilots. Avoid that aircraft. It was too dangerous. The cost of engagement was simply too high. When Hell's Fury finally touched down at Framlingham at 16:47 hours, a full 9 hours after they had taken off, the ground crew swarmed the plane, their faces a mixture of awe and concern. The bomber was a wreck. 47 bullet holes stitched across its fuselage. 13 larger gashes from 20mm cannon strikes. A hydraulic line was severed, and the rudder was cracked and barely functional, but it flew, and its 10-man crew was alive. Donovan climbed out of his tail position, his movements stiff from the cold in the cramped quarters. His hands were perfectly steady. There was no tremor, no visible sign of the life-and-death struggle he had just endured. Frank Murphy, the crew chief, walked to the tail, his expression grim. He checked the ammunition boxes and found them all empty. Every single round had been expended. He found Donovan sitting on the tarmac a few feet away, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the damp English air. "You used everything," Murphy said, his voice quiet. 2,000 rounds. You fired every bullet we loaded." Donovan took a slow drag from his cigarette. "Had to," he replied. "Didn't have enough to waste any." The official debriefing was a surreal affair. Captain Whitmore recounted the events, his voice still filled with a sense of disbelief. When it was time to tally the kills, the numbers were staggering. Based on confirmations from the crew, radio intercepts from German channels, and visual reports from the P-51 escorts who had finally arrived near the target, the final count was established. 12 confirmed kills, Murphy read from his notes. 4 probables and 3 damaged. Whitmore looked at Donovan, who was sitting quietly in the back of the room. You destroyed 12 fighters in one mission. 19, if you count the probables and damaged, Murphy added. All in, about 4 minutes of sustained combat. The news ripped through the 390th Bomb Group before sunset. By the next morning, every tail gunner at Framlingham was talking about Donovan's tactics. By the afternoon, the 8th Air Force headquarters had caught wind of the story and sent representatives to interview the crew. That evening, a staff car pulled up to the enlisted men's barracks. Major General Frederick Anderson, the commanding officer of the entire 8th Bomber Command, stepped out. He found Donovan where he was most comfortable, in the barracks, methodically cleaning his guns. Anderson introduced himself and asked Donovan to explain his philosophy. Donovan spoke about seizing the initiative, about psychological intimidation, about attacking the enemy while they were still forming up, exploiting their moment of vulnerability. When he was finished, the general asked a single, crucial question. Can you teach this to others? Not everyone has the temperament for it, sir, Donovan said honestly. You need gunners who think like fighters, men who see opportunity instead of just threat, men who would rather attack than defend. Find them, Anderson ordered. He authorized a special training program on the spot, with Donovan at its head. The young sergeant from South Boston, who had defied every rule in the book, was now being asked to write a new one. He spent the next month developing what would become officially known as the Donovan Doctrine. Its principles were simple, but they were revolutionary. Seize the initiative. Use psychological warfare. Focus your fire. And most importantly, accept that increased individual risk could lead to collective survival. The doctrine was met with immediate resistance from the old guard. They called it reckless, a waste of ammunition, a suicide tactic. But the numbers didn't lie. In March of 1944, before Donovan's mission, the tail gunner casualty rate was 38%. By June, after his aggressive fire doctrine had been taught to hundreds of other gunners, that rate had plummeted to 23%. German fighters, who once completed over half of their attack runs, were now being broken up so effectively that their success rate dropped to just 27%. Donovan's doctrine, born in a 4-minute storm of violence, was credited with saving an estimated 300 American bombers and the lives of 3,000 airmen. Donovan himself never flew another combat mission. He spent the rest of the war as an instructor, shaping a new generation of gunners who fought with his aggressive spirit. After the war, he returned to Boston, put his uniform in a closet, and went to work in construction. He never spoke of the war, never attended reunions, never sought recognition. When a journalist found him in the 1960s, he declined the interview. I just did what needed doing, he said. So did hundreds of other gunners. They're the real story. Michael Donovan passed away in 1998, at the age of 76. His obituary was a short paragraph in the Boston Globe, mentioning his Distinguished Service Cross and his family. It didn't mention the 12 kills in 4 minutes. It didn't mention the 3,000 lives he saved, but the men he trained never forgot. They knew his legacy wasn't written in medals or headlines. It was written in the quiet, long lives of the men who came home, the sons and daughters they raised, and the peaceful world they helped to build. The greatest mystery of Michael Donovan is not what he did in the sky that day, but how a man capable of such incredible, focused violence could return to a life of such profound, humble silence. He was a hunter who, once the war was won, quietly laid down his arms and walked away, his duty done. The story of Michael Donovan is more than just a tale of incredible courage. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest innovations are born not from careful planning in a distant headquarters, but from the desperate, brilliant instincts of a single individual in the heart of the storm. His doctrine was not just a new way to fire a gun, it was a new way to think about survival. He taught a generation of airmen that fear is what happens when you react, but confidence is what happens when you act first. Donovan's life challenges us to look at the quiet heroes who walk among us, the humble men and women who, in a defining moment, chose to step forward and change the world, only to then step back into the quiet rhythm of an ordinary life. His story is a testament to the idea that true strength is not the ability to wage war, but the wisdom to know when the fighting is done and the grace to return to peace. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a protector who understood that the ultimate goal of fighting is to create a world where no one has to fight at all. What do you think? Was Donovan a reckless gambler who got lucky, or a tactical genius who saw the battlefield more clearly than his superiors? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.